Michael Crichton is on the cover of this week's Time magazine as the hitman with the golden touch. He is a trained physician at Harvard, film director and screenwriter. He recently added television producer to his list of achievements with the Emmy Award-winning series ER. But of course, he is best known as one of the most successful novelists of our time. Spanning almost 30 years, his prolific writing career includes such blockbuster hits as The Andromeda Strain, Rising Sun, and Disclosure. His latest book is The Lost World. It enjoys a national release of 2 million copies. It is a sequel to Jurassic Park, whose film version grossed a record-breaking $912 million. I am pleased to have Michael Crichton back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
Why this for you now? I mean, was it things that you wanted to say about dinosaurs? Was it simply easy for you to do? What caused you to write one more time a book about dinosaurs, the fact that there was a second sight?
You know, it was really something that came from readers. I mean, from the first publication of the book, kids began to read it, and they would send letters going, what about the sequel, what about the sequel, what about the sequel? And I had not ever done a sequel before and would always say, there won't be one. But then as time went on, they would say, well, this would be a good sequel, and here's another idea for a sequel. And now you're reading them thinking, no, that's not right. No, we wouldn't do that. And then you start thinking, well, why not? Well, what would be good?
Yeah.
And eventually, you know, there did seem to be the likelihood that there would be another film. And Stephen seemed to have some interest in that. And
I bet Stephen had a lot of interest in that.
Well, you know, I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I think that there's always a sort of mixed feeling about this, you know, going back and doing it again, or would it really be interesting? Would it really be different?
And can it stand on its own two legs?
Yeah, all those things. So,
or 4 legs.
Right. 2 or 4, depends on the species.
Depends on the species, doesn't it? Right.
And actually, I began to feel as though, you know, living in this town of sequels, where, you know, there's just sequel. I've never done a sequel. And it's kind of a difficult thing to do, I would think.
The trepidation is what? That,
well, it's a very difficult structural problem because it has to be the same but different.
Yeah.
Now, if it's really the same, then it's the same. And if it's really different, then it's not a sequel.
Yeah,
so,
something else.
So it's in some kind of funny intermediate territory.
Yeah. And what happened to cause you to say, all right, I'll go ahead? I mean, did you think about characters? Did you think about, there are things about this story that I have not told? Was there some metaphor you wanted to bring to the fore?
Yes, there was some of that. There was absolutely. Well, there was the feeling that I had that I would be able to talk to a large audience, particularly a large audience of kids. And so what would you talk to them about?
Yeah. Something they can relate to, something.
Yeah. Or something they ought to be thinking about.
Yeah. And what else? I mean, in terms of ideas, did you want to massage?
Well, I think there's hardly anything more difficult to talk about in a popular book than evolution.
Yeah.
It's just a very innately complex subject.
But that's your genius, Michael. I mean, you bring complex... No, come on. I mean, it is. You have taken... I mean, let me suggest that you go to a publisher or you go to a movie company and you say, I've written a book about DNA... Now, before the Simpson trial, I've written a book about DNA. and didn't mention dinosaurs, didn't mention storytelling, just mentioned... They wouldn't say
can't wait.
They won't say can't wait. Yeah. But when you wrote this, you really wanted to treat some subject matter. I mean, evolution being one, but also some sense of natural selection, and also you wanted to say some things about behavior, did you not? That had some...
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Ideas about behavior. Well, there's a third thing that I ought to tell you about. At the time when ER was just before it came on, there was some publicity relating to ER. All the press questions had to do with whether it was going to be very controversial and very contentious, because that's the way anything that I was involved with was perceived. And I thought...
And this was after Disclosure.
This is after Disclosure, which was certainly controversial enough. And I thought, you know, I've done Rising Sun and Disclosure, and maybe it's time not to be so controversial. Just
be comfortable.
Well, just break the pattern.
Yeah.
You know, and perhaps not also to... You know, you can become a scold.
Once you made the decision to go, Was it easy then? I mean, once you found the peg that you wanted to hang this story on, because you had a lot of stuff to go with, you're building on something. You don't have to establish a scientific bona fides, do you? I mean, you've already explained that.
Well, you can't. My feeling was you had to address a different scientific subject area.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the first book to me was about sort of micro subjects,
right,
and DNA and technology. This one is about macro subjects. It's about populations.
Right.
It's about long-term trends. It's about extinction.
Do you think the human species is on the road to extinction because of its behavior, because it's lost control of civility?
Well, I think, let's see what we'd say. Are we on the road to extinction? Absolutely, because all species become extinct.
Yeah. And because we aren't treating the planet very well.
Yeah, although, there's questions about that. But, I mean, at least there's an argument to be made that we're not doing our best. In terms of civility, I don't know. I mean, actually, the concern that I have about civility is that the most important thing for us as a species, unlike other species, we evolve and adapt to our environment through our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our bodies have not significantly changed in 35, 50,000 years, but our behavior has changed enormously since the time that we were chipping flints in caves.
Because our brain has been at work.
Our brain has been at work, but our brain hasn't changed. It's the same brain, but we've had all this
cumulative wisdom.
Right, elaboration of stuff. And the need that we have as a species, therefore, is similar to what a population needs in terms of variability inside the population. There has to be many different kinds of animals inside, a variation inside a species, so that if something happens, like a plague or something, there's enough variation that some animals survive because they have, let's say, an innate resistance or something like that. Well, for us, the equivalent of that is ideas. There has to be a pool, a variable pool of ideas, diversity of ideas, ways of thinking, notions of what to do. And one of the concerns that I have is that our technology now is shrinking the pool of ideas, and certainly the current tendency in this country, the lack of civility. I mean, I think it's really true that some people are suggesting that maybe the Congress needs a timeout. The way children, this kind of shrieking.
Yeah, but you made a speech in which you did that on the periphery of that particular issue. Well, coming back to the extinction of the species, your sense, is this something you worry about? Is this something, or is it just of interest and curiosity to you because it is fodder for a next great book?
Do I worry about it personally?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense of...
No, I don't.
It's not something...
No, it's not. I mean, it's not around the corner, I don't think. No. In fact, I think that most of the things that people are worrying about here are, the trends in global warming or the changes in the rainforest. I'm really not persuaded that maybe they're not a good idea, but it's not clear exactly how dire they are.
That the threat is as characterized.
On the other hand, we are in a position to recognize that certain kinds of changes, certain kinds of behavior can produce catastrophic change. And it's not always clear where those things are.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that's a sort of the notion that we can always proceed with. This idea of civility to me is an example of that. We're in a nation that really wants to shout everybody else down at the moment, and we're really shrinking the notion of available options. We're shrinking the diversity of opinion on almost every subject so that you're either for it or against it. You're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. This is not healthy.
Why, I want to come back to something else you said and funnel into that. Why is technology shrinking the body of ideas? Why does it do that?
I don't know.
I would think it would expand ideas.
That's right, and that was always the promise.
Right.
The promise was always, 500 television channels and this great...
Information superhighway.
And, this great diversity, but it turns out...
And the internet, and we can speak to everybody, and we have access to everything, and my God, the global village is upon us.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have now 500 channels, and we know what that's like. You know, there's
Nobody
500
wants to watch them. That's what it's like.
Yeah, and why that shrinking occurs, you know, why there's a sort of limitation, I'm not entirely, I'm not clear at all about it, but it does seem to be happening.
Yeah. Let me come back to the book. Characters, who comes forward from Jurassic Park?
Only one, I think, Ian Malcolm.
He's the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's called on to go. He's played by Jeff Goldberg in the film, right?
Yes,
Goldblum.
Yes.
Goldblum, right?
Bloom.
He goes to Costa Rica.
Yes.
And he's the only one that will make an appearance.
Well, I don't know. Stephen may do something else, but in the book, my thinking really was that I desperately needed that character back.
Yeah.
You know, because he is the ironic commentator inside the story who talks about the action as it takes place.
And we thought he was dead, but...
That's right. It's Sherlock Holmes when the Reichenbach falls, you know.
Well, speaking of that, why the title The Lost World?
It's a reference to a Conan Doyle story called The Lost World.
Why did you choose that, though?
Well, you know, it was a thing that I liked as a child. It's one of the more pulpy Conan Doyle stories. It's a Professor Challenger story, and it's actually not a very good story, but it's a wonderful title, and it's about an expedition back to a place where there are dinosaurs.
Let me talk about you and satisfaction. Are you happiest in the creative process? When is Michael Crichton happiest? At what point in that process? Gathering the idea, the concept, the research, beginning the first chapter, getting to the end. As your workday begins to grow from maybe 10 hours to 12 to 14 to 16 to 18, you know.
I think that if I was charting it, you know, there's an early dissatisfaction which has to do with what will I do next, you know, or with.
You mean how do I go from chapter to chapter to chapter? How do I keep the audience?
No, just choosing the next project.
Okay. Oh, next project.
Yeah. You know, that early sort of decision about will it be this or that, and if it's that, then how exactly will it be? And then at a certain point when I'm doing focused research, and it begins to come together, I start to get quite excited. And of course, it's still just ideas, you know, so it's quite wonderful. And it has no concrete form to be disappointing yet. And maybe the first 60 pages is very exciting.
Right.
You know, it's sort of this wonderful future ahead, and I just can't wait. And then eventually it starts to be another book. Yeah.
So where you began to think you were going is not where you're going to end up ever.
I don't know how. No, it isn't that. It's just that this wonderful sort of nebulous thing starts to be concrete. It starts to be this page, this way of formulating the ideas, and then it's just its specific expression kills that beautiful idea. You know, it's like your hopes for working on a movie. You start, oh, it's going to be so great, and in the end, it's just a movie. That's all it ever is. And so I begin to have that sort of a feeling of, well, and I'm still enthusiastic. And then as I finish, there's a part that gets kind of hard. It starts to be a grind, always.
Now, what is that part?
Well, there's a lot of cleaning up to do. You said he went to Costa Rica for 4 days, but it says he left on Tuesday, and this is only Saturday, so isn't that just 3 days?
Yeah.
And isn't he 36? And if he's 36, how can he be an assistant professor? Shouldn't he be an associate? Endless.
Yeah. So following up and closing all those loopholes.
All those.
But where the story is going, once you know what the concept is, and someone, I think it was Stephen, called you the high priest of high concept. What did he mean?
I don't know. I wanted to ask him about that.
You did too?
Well, I think I know what it is.
Well, tell me what he meant.
Well, I think he means that that I seem to be able to come up with these ideas that in themselves look as though they can hold a movie.
Yeah, and they're interesting ideas, and they're on the edge of what people are thinking about at the time. I mean, where it comes from, the unerring ability to say, certainly with Rising Sun, and certainly with Disclosure, and Jurassic Park, and DNA, and all of that, and now question of evolution and extinction and natural selection. Is it just that you smell the air and you, in a sense, that your instinct and your assimilation process is superb?
I have no idea.
You don't?
I think...
It's like asking...
You know, Charlie, I really feel if you try and hit it, you can't.
Right.
So all you can do is do what interests you.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a certain kind of there's a certain way where every time I'm working on something, I wish I was working on something else. You know, I mean, I just think, well, why am I doing this? You know, particularly because a lot of my research is directed toward answering some kind of a question, and I've got the question answered before I start to write the book.
You do?
Yeah. So now writing the book is just a sort of...
But does the answer come from the research?
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, so you ask the question, the research gives you the answer, then you got to write the book.
Yes.
What's the question here?
How are we going to think about our own behavior? How would you begin to consider what behavior might be? How much rope has evolution, you know, cut us? How much slack? You know, do we really have a fair amount of maneuvering room here, or is it all kind of unknown? Is there a cliff somewhere where you just fall right off it very rapidly and go oops, and it's a long drop, and it's over. And it's over.
So that's the question you're asking.
Yes.
And you do it through dinosaurs because A, they were there, because it's a connection to a previous work, and because it's, you know, it's a species that became extinct.
Exactly.
You know, so that provides you the fodder that you need. You're going to direct this?
No.
You're not? Because you don't have time, because other people can do it better, or for some other reason?
No, I think Steven
Spielberg.
Yes.
Well, okay.
Yes. I hope he will. Yes.
You do. I mean, you're counting on it, aren't we?
Yeah, I'd like it very much.
We wanted to go for it. Do you believe, I mean, I know you don't like to deal in questions like this, and I'm not that intrigued by them, but do you believe it'll be bigger and better than Jurassic Park? Because the ideas, the characters are there, it has been a huge success. It's going to draw them into the tent. And as long as they can find out that you're onto some new idea here that's equally interesting and perhaps more so.
I can't imagine anything being bigger than that.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We've settled.
Yeah, I can't. But I don't know. It will be as good as it is.
Yeah.
You know?
There is this sense about you that you are, that somewhere up there, that there's a series of ideas are feeding into you. And I base this on the speech you made at the National Press Club, on some conversations you and I've had, on a series of interviews, that somehow, in terms of where our society is, in terms of media, in terms of violence, in terms of behavior, you know, in terms of popular ideas that are out there, that you are percolating with some great story. And it's sort of there, and you're feeling, as you do this and as you do other things, am I even close?
I really hope it's true.
Yes, I do too.
Oh, I hope it's true. But there are some of these areas I'm trying to figure out how to do something. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that.
Well, tell me. Oh, concerned about which?
All of them.
Yeah. What's your reaction to the Simpson trial?
Oh, I don't know that I have an unusual response. It's horrifying to me, you know, in a way. My inclination is to say it's something very unraveling about the American judicial system.
Yeah.
And in that sense, probably good for people to see.
Great lawyers have come to this desk and said the same thing. Arthur Lyman, people like that.
He's a great lawyer.
He's a great lawyer.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm always struck by is how many commentators are saying, well, other judicial proceedings are not like this. As far as I can tell, they all are.
Exactly.
Yes, this kind of tendency to trash reputations and the effort to sort of divert everything to side issues.
All about winning and losing, and never about...
Never about.
How about victimization in our, you know, the notion of victimization in terms of the way so many people say, give me a pass. I had a bad childhood. Give me a pass because I didn't have as equal playing field. Give me a pass for whatever I did. You know, it's a little bit of the Menendez brothers.
Right. I'm very interested in this. You know, I think there's two problems with it. And one part of it I try to do in Disclosure, which is that as a strategy, you know, because there's one element of feminist thought tends in this direction. As a strategy, it seems to me it's a very bad strategy. You know, it's a strategy of saying I have no power, and somebody has to give me some. It's just a very difficult to walk down the street if that's how you feel, and it would be much better to choose another strategy. I certainly didn't want my daughter thinking I am not able to take care of myself unless all the men in my environment behave themselves. I'm going to teach her something else, you know.
Yeah.
She'll take care of herself fine, and she'll be able to influence those men as strongly as she needs to. So that's the first problem. The second problem, really, is that the insistence on the lack of responsibility, which is what we're talking about here, it seems to me, A, not true. You know, as far as I can tell, the correlation between life experiences and behavioral outcomes is loose at best. You know, I mean, there are people who have had terrible, terrible early life formative experiences. It's just shocking and awful and abusive, and they turn out to be just great. And then and everybody knows about them, these privileged rich brats that go out and kill people.
Right.
You know, so those links, you know, it seems to me, are not at all demonstrated. They're far from demonstrated, and therefore, when we start to say, well, no one's really responsible for anything, our behavior is simply the sort of sum of all of our past life experiences, that by the time I get to this point in life, you know, it's a sort of stack of cards behind me of events that lead up to this, so that will decide whether or not I pull a gun and shoot you or not. You know, and I'm not really responsible for it. It's all predetermined in a way. That, seems to me, is a very, very difficult thing for the society to work with if people start to believe it.
And also abhorrent, yeah.
Yeah.
When these themes, they're there, you think about them, you see something, you know...
Trying to get a story.
Trying to get a story.
Trying to get a story. I mean, see, Disclosure was a true story, so it was just dropped in my lap, and I went, ooh. So I'm looking for, you know, and you know, I think, well, is that a story? Will that do it? You know, can I take that story? Can I pull it apart? I mean, in a sense, also Rising Sun was based on a true incident. So my tendency is to take real things, and I'm looking for a real thing that does it.
And one day you'll pick up the paper and say, or in a magazine like Time, and there'll be, my God.
There it is.
There it is.
Hope so.
And then what will you do? You'll be on the phone, or you'll just say, this is it, and you'll want to know everything you can possibly find out about that story.
Yes.
And where it leads, and what it says, and
then change it.
Yes, and change it. And make it your own.
That's right, make it better.
I don't want to touch on it for but a moment, but the notion of character and motivation and all those qualities, does it interest you any more than as you write more books and have more life experiences?
It does now, you know, and I think that part of what we're talking about here relates to that. In writing, I have always felt that I don't really understand why people do what they do. I really don't. So that...
Or don't do what they should do.
Yes. So I'm always doing an external kind of description. All I feel comfortable with is what happens. I'm very uncertain about the inner life or motivations, because I think that's all.
All what?
Well, it's either fantasy or it's ex post facto rationalization, or... You know, certainly I've gotten into certain kinds of situations, or certain things have happened to me that have upset me, and later I think, why did you do that? Why did you walk into that room? Why did you say that to that?
Yeah, me too.
I don't have a good explanation.
I don't either. And you know what, I have never bought into the idea where people say, he wanted to get caught. and that's why he did it. I have never believed that. Somebody, you know, wanted desperately because they took a risk and they were on the edge. I mean, what makes some of us more risk takers than others, what makes some of us want to go on the high wire, is one factor, and understanding that other people wiser than I can grasp it. But it is this sort of simple explanation, you want to get caught, that's why I did it, you know.
Yeah.
I don't understand, you know.
I mean, I think it's probably true of some people, or it's probably true of some kinds of repetitive behaviors, but as a general...
Wanting to get caught, or just some uncontrollable rage or urge?
Yes, or what?
Yeah. As a medical student, were you interested in psychology at all?
Yes, yes. My choice as a medical student was to become a surgeon or a psychiatrist, and actually when I started,
surgeon?
No, just a surgeon, just a general surgeon.
Yeah.
And when I started directing, I thought, you know, this is really interesting. It is somewhere between being a surgeon and a psychiatrist.
How so?
Well, I mean, one of the things that surgeons really insist on is the ability to, I mean, surgeons and ship captains are the last bastion of real, you know, we're going to do it my way, and do this, do this, do this, do this.
And I'm in control of the destiny of this craft.
That's right.
You know,
and so
sink or swim, blame me or credit me.
Right, and so are film directors.
Yeah.
But, of course,
the film directors always say, the studio made me do it.
Yes,
it wasn't me. I love the finish. If they'd used my finish, we would have had a winner.
Well,
you know,
that's sometimes true. Yeah.
But why haven't you directed more then? Because
you know, it seems to me as though there are just sort of periods in my life, you know, where sometimes I really want to direct and not write, and sometimes I really want to write and not direct.
Yeah. Life has turned out quite well for Michael.
Knock on
wood.
Every piece of wood
I mean,
yes.
you've got you found happiness in marriage. You have a child.
Yes.
Your father. You enjoy that. Satisfying.
Yes.
You know, forget the commercial success, which I know. I mean, you've been savvy about, in a sense. I mean, in terms of what you have written has an appeal, and you may not understand it. And I may not understand it, but we read it, and an audience likes it, and people turn it into interesting and exciting movies. And you may not like some of those movies, as you haven't, right? I mean, you didn't like Rising Sun at all.
No, I didn't.
You know.
Sure.
You thought Disclosure was what? Because that's been out since you and I
liked
talked.
it a lot.
Liked it a lot.
A lot, yeah.
And Jurassic Park couldn't have been better, probably, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, what's the drive? In a sense, I mean, what's the mountaintop for you?
I'm not clear. You know, there was a time a few years ago when it was to pay the house payments.
Yeah, right.
That's clear.
Yeah,
that's easy. You know, at some other point, I think, well, maybe what I do really is compulsive behavior. You know, maybe I'm just compelled to do it.
Yeah, I know. No.
Yeah. But I also think, you know, there's something that happens to me a lot where the conventional wisdom frequently irritates me so much. You know, I'll hear somebody talking, or I'll read something, and I'll think, that is so. Robbie, the physicist, used to listen to certain presentations, and he would say, he's not even wrong.
No, that's a great one.
Not even in the ballpark.
Not in the ballpark.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Not even close. Not even wrong.
Yeah, and I get so annoyed, you know, and I think a lot of that drives the writing.
The compulsion.
Yeah, in some sense of
and anger, and saying they don't have any clue as to what's really going on.
Right.
You know, and then frequently the ideas you attack, though, or you address or engage, or ideas that there's so much conventional wisdom out there about, right? Nature, nurture, selection, DNA, all those things. Could you ever imagine yourself having been to? Could you imagine yourself as a lawyer?
Yes.
You could.
Yes. Yes, I could easily see myself doing that. I think my mind works that way.
How is that?
I'm not sure.
Sort of kind of a deductive reasoning, or?
Yeah, and a kind of disputatious turn of mind.
Like what?
A tendency to niggle over details. I mean, I have all
really?
that. Yes,
we thought you, Michael, sits there at home with a computer and just sort of, I mean, there was no sort of haggling over small points.
That's all there is haggling over it. So.
I mean, a little bit anal?
Yeah, I think so. I think, yes, I think it's, yeah.
And do you ask yourself where it comes from, like going into that door? Where does all this sort of come from?
Often. Often. And I haven't a clue.
Yeah.
I
See,
really
what is
don't.
interesting about you, and you've obviously thought about this, it is the sense that you have thought about these things. You ask yourself introspective questions. But I'm not sure how many answers you come up with, just from your response.
You know, Charlie, I think there is very little, really, there's very little understanding of human behavior. You know, what I was interested, of course, here's my child, and I can't help it. In some way,
She's 6 or 7 or 8?
She's 6 now, but as she's developing, one of the things I'm really interested in is some sense of causality and motivation. So I'd say to her, she'd say, Daddy, I want this. And I'd say, why? And she'd say, at a certain age, because.
Yeah, right.
And I'd say, because what? Because. There was nothing, it was just because.
Yeah.
I want it because I want it. And it was quite a long time later, 2 or 3 years later, that there began to be a narrative. Well, I want it because I have to take this to do that, or I want it because I need this for school, or I want it. But that's baloney. You know, she wants it because.
Because.
Yeah. And I think that's true of all of us.
Yeah. That had a different twist with when I'm an only child. My parents would say, you can't do that. And I'd say, why? Because. That's different, though, because hers is just, it's a perfectly natural want, desire, interest, curiosity.
I think also our motivation, I mean, I think when you say why, if a kid says I want something, you say why. At a certain age, they start searching around for the answer that will satisfy you so that they can get what they want. And that's all it is. And I'm not sure it's any more complicated when you get to the Menendez brothers.
Just that they thought they wanted it. They wanted the family fortune, and to get it, they had to kill their parents.
I don't know.
I mean, you don't know, but that's plausible.
I think so.
That's conventional wisdom. You're really interested in that trial, aren't you? Because of the gruesomeness of standing behind.
I'm interested in the notion that whatever happens in upbringing could be sufficient reason to allow you to shoot your parents and pause to reload. I mean, that's not an act of passion
or rage.
Or rage. It's not a. I mean, I think it's very clear, by the way, that people can have brief psychotic episodes. They really can. They can go crazy. They can have drug-induced psychoses, or they can have simple psychotic breaks. And during that time, they can not be in control, and they can do terrible things. And then later, they're okay again, and they really don't remember what happened. But that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. Have you thought about the notion of Bosnia and the kind of brutality that takes place still, Rwanda.
Rwanda.
You know, I mean, it's just extraordinary to me to hear stories of a soldier, bringing a family together, and in front of the children, raping the mother, slitting the throat of the. I mean, just for us, a concept of. I mean, it's a thing about the mind that just is another level than you can conceive of. That.
I think we live in a rarefied world.
You and I, and
I think that's the world.
I do too. That's probably true. That's
the world.
That violence and that roughness.
1/3 of the population of Cambodia killed. 2 million people out of 6.
Yeah.
For what? For what? Mass graves for little children. It seems to be. I mean, there's been a lot of that in this century. And I think at some point it gets to be harder and harder to say, oh, well, that's this special case, or that's that special case, or that's because of Stalin, or because of Hitler.
It's the nature
it keeps happening. It's us.
What's next for you?
I haven't a clue.
Does that feel good or anxious producing?
It really fills me with anxiety and dread.
The what?
It fills me with anxiety and dread. I'd much rather have things planned out. But I think it's not an accident that sometimes I get to this point and I think, well, I don't know what I'll do next. It's opening a space.
Yeah. We've talked about motivation, understanding. Do you understand your talent?
No.
You don't? You know,
my experience is of not being, and I think there's a lot of people who would agree with this, not being very gifted at writing, and of having to try really hard, to work very hard at what I do, to put in long hours and to concentrate on it. I don't feel in any way that I have natural abilities in this, and I just work hard. That's my experience.
Working hard.
Yeah.
Keeping your eye on the goal.
Well,
Yes.
This is something I wanted to do. You know, I wanted
For
to
a
be a
long
writer, and I'm very happy to be doing it. But I don't think that I'm especially.
Is it easier?
No, it's harder.
It's harder.
Sure.
Why? Why do you say sure?
Well, I think that that's a common experience for people who do some activity.
The better you do it,
over.
the better you do it, the more difficult the more difficult it is, because you understand the levels of proficiency, one, and
Yes.
secondly, the more you do it, the more you understand about something, the more you appreciate the complexity of it.
Yes, and the more of all the easy things you get, so pretty soon you've done all those easy things.
It's a pleasure to have you here. It's always a great conversation. I wanted to go longer, but I made a promise to your people that I would get out of here within a reasonable time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Michael Crichton, The Lost World. We'll be right back.